Bobby Broyles and Tim McDonald here.
Should be a really interesting matchup. Buckle up. If you're not watching, you got some problems.
Through 3 teams now during our 12 teams and 12-day series presented by Geico. That guy right there is Tim McDonald. I'm Bobby Broyles. Thanks for joining us. Well, Tim, we're breaking down JMU today, and boy, weren't the Dukes fun to watch offensively last year. Madison enters the fall with a new head coach and a new starting quarterback going into training camp.
That's right. I guess we can call it a new starting quarterback. I do trust that Brian Shore is going to be the guy taking the snaps as the season starts. But again, JMU, look at this team, a team of 2 different tales last year.
Yep.
Starting the season, you beat SMU, College Game Day comes to campus in Vad Lee, and rightfully so. That was one of the most dangerous offenses, not only in CAA football, but in the FCS. Vad Lee gets injured, some offensive struggles a little bit down the stretch. Brian Shore comes in, though. I thought he did a pretty good job for coming in late. Let's remember a guy who really wasn't expected to play because Vad Lee was doing so well ahead of him. Comes in, starts the final 4 games, and JMU was a playoff team last year. Of course, that loss to Colgate is going to hurt, and I know a lot of the players coming into this year are going to use that moving forward. Just looking at the quarterback position, 7 touchdowns for Shore, 1 interception. But again, the production, 105 yards passing per game. I know he didn't play a whole season, but it did slow down the offense a little bit. Shore, I expect to make some changes moving into this year. We also think Connor Mitch, a South Carolina transfer, a quarterback who spent 3 seasons in the SEC at South Carolina. But again, you talk about this changing culture. The amount of players on this offense that return, it's just, I feel like all these guys have been in college for 5 years. Up and down this roster. Mike Houston comes in from the Citadel. A running type of coach, a coach who implemented the triple option at Lenore Ryan, a Division II school. Also at the Citadel, turned the Citadel into a playoff team. They beat Coastal Carolina last year in the playoffs, 9-4 record. All these attributes, I love the hire. I think he's a guy who's going to come in, a run-first mentality. But again, Brian Shore in this offense, we talk about the players coming back. Cardin Johnson, a running back who could be a starting running back on any team. Khalid Abdullah, both accounted for 23 touchdowns rushing. Both averaged over 80 yards per game. Mitchell Kirsch, he's back on the offensive line. He's an All-CAA performer. Brandon Ravenel, Rashard Davis, up and down the list on this offense. There's so many guys returning, so many players who have experience. If you're Coach Mike Houston and coming into your first year, you got to say, well, we don't have to change too much offensively. Stick to my guns. But again, so many weapons up and down this list on offense.
We both got to meet Coach Houston for the first time at Media Day, and here he is talking about all those weapons that come back on offense.
Well, with Cardin and Khalid, you were fortunate to have 2 what I consider top-end running backs. I mean, either one could be a starter on most teams in our league. And so we plan on playing those 2 guys, alternating them in and out, series to series, and playing them together. And really, I would list them as co-starters, when looking at our depth chart. Brandon had a great year last year. The big thing with him is he's surrounded by some other talented players there in the receiving corps, whether you're talking about Rashard Davis or Damo Taylor, Ish Hyman, John Miller, or Terrence Alls, who's joining us here at the beginning of camp. We have a group there where you should be able to keep people from really isolating in on one player.
As successful this team was on offense in 2015, the Dukes took plenty of hits on defense and often struggled to get off the field. Still, Tim, like many Madison teams in past years, a hungry unit returns with a whole lot of playmakers.
Yeah, much like the offense, a bunch of guys. I feel like Adam Morrison and Tim Tebow, guys who you felt like were in college forever. That's me and Gage Steele and Taylor Reynolds. I feel like these guys have been playing at JMU for the past 7 seasons. But again, those 2 guys I think are going to be huge this season. A new head coach, 3rd head coach for these guys, let's keep that in mind, in their college careers. Both of them, I think, are going to need to be the leaders. We saw Andrew Ankra, too, a guy last year as a sophomore, break out on the scene, 56 tackles, 11 tackles for loss, 10.5 sacks, a guy who we really didn't see that coming, but he expects to have another phenomenal season. I think all 3 of those players are going to be the keys. Again, it's going to take a whole unit, 9 starters back. JMU allowed 28 points per game, which is 11th in CAA football, 10th in rush defense, 10th in total defense. Are we going to expect to see, well, we got a new steel wall coming and JMU's there? I don't think it's going to be entirely different. But again, is interesting to look at. Bob Trott was hired as the defensive coordinator at JMU. Of course, Bob Trott was the defensive coordinator for the last couple of years at Richmond. Obviously, not only a CAA football rival, but an in-state rival. That's something to keep an eye on. I know we'll get into that matchup a little bit later, but that will be very interesting to think about. I don't think he's going to come in and change everything. I don't think that's going to happen, but I do think there's so many guys back and there's so many experienced players that JMU defensively is going to have some improvement, especially against the run, especially against giving up a lot of points per game. I'm excited to see what it looks like because we really don't know what Coach Houston has to offer on defense.
Once again, first-year head coach Mike Houston talking about the expectations for the defense in 2016.
The big thing is just to be more consistent, to be more fundamentally sound, and to be more physical at the point of contact. I think that last year's unit suffered a little bit from just not being on the same page, and those breakdowns in assignment, led to a lot of big plays, and sometimes that can snowball on you. I think the kids fully understand our scheme going into camp. I think they understand that if they play together, they have a chance to be successful. And I think the big thing is we have that great leadership from Raven and Taylor and Andrew, and then Gage Steele I expect to have a huge year. He had a great spring. I think he maybe struggled a little bit the last 2 years. We're trying to get him thinking less and playing faster more.
The Dukes coming off consecutive postseason berths and shared the CAA football title as a co-champion in 2015. The schedule kicks off with 2 non-conference games at home before playing North Carolina in Week 3. JMU will be looking for some revenge against the in-state rivals this year, and both will be televised on Comcast Sportsnet.
Yeah, we'll get into those in a little bit, but I really do like the way this schedule sets up. You look at Morehead State and Central Connecticut State, 2 teams that come into JMU's Bridgeport Stadium, and you can really get an idea of what Coach Houston wants to do. It's going to be a good time for the offense to get flowing, the defense to get flowing, even special teams. This is a whole new look JMU team.
Yep.
I think those are perfect games to start at home. Then you have to play that FBS opponent. Obviously a hard team in North Carolina who's very good, brings back a lot of weapons. But Richmond on the road, William and Mary at home, both on Comcast, as you mentioned. Interesting games, too, because you think about James Madison playing them last year. A little bit of revenge factor there, obviously. Then you look at the rest of the schedule. I mean, put any FCS coach, put any FBS coach. The 5 total away games this year, at North Carolina, at Maine, at New Hampshire, at Richmond, at Villanova. Obviously hard, because a lot of those are conference games, but amazingly difficult when you think about that stretch of away games. It's going to be interesting to see, does James Madison play up for when it's home, play up for when it's away? Has to do that strange, not a lot of teams have to do it, but that strange trip to Maine and that strange trip to New Hampshire in the same season. I think the schedule starts nicely. I really do think that they'll get into the flow early under a new head coach. But again, it's those questions down the road. Can you perform well on the road week in and week out in CAA, especially against really good teams?
James Madison's season begins at home versus Morehead State on Saturday, September the 3rd at 6 p.m. That game can be seen live on CAA.tv.
I don't know about you, but I mean, Brandon Ravenel, character,
man.
Absolute character, an awesome guy. But at me today, he stole the show.
Yes, he did.
You can see his interview right now. Find out for yourself on CAAfootball.com. And we also spoke with Gage Steele as well. A couple of features looking into their game day experiences at JMU. I'm going to be tuning into that one, even though I've already watched it.
Absolutely, Tim. Week 1 of 12 teams in 12 days presented by Geico wraps up tomorrow with the Maine Black Bears. Tim and I will be back with that, again, previewing a team with a new head coach in Joe Harris-Simiak. Have a great day.